People think rock bottom is a bad place. It isn't. Rock bottom is a foundation. That Christmas Eve, 10 years ago, the Quinn estate glowed like a postcard. But inside, it felt like a courtroom where I was already guilty. I sat near the end of the table, hands folded neatly in my lap, trying to blend into the white linen. My father, Daniel Quinn, raised his glass at the head of the table. His smile was wide, his voice strong. "To Michelle," he said. "The pride of the Quinn family. The one who keeps our legacy alive." Guests clapped. Champagne flutes chimed. My younger sister, Michelle, beamed under the glow of admiration. When one of the guests turned to me and asked politely, "And what do you do, Rosalind?" I smiled and said, "I'm studying forensic accounting. I want to stop financial fraud." The woman nodded politely, but Daniel chuckled. A cold, dry sound. "Accounting," he said, swirling his drink. "She counts other people's money because she'll never have any of her own. You should find a husband, Rosalind. That's the only way you'll ever sit at a table like this again." The table laughed. The air felt thin. Michelle looked at me with that gentle, pitying smile she used when she thought she was being kind. I stared at the centerpiece. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But I didn't. I stood up. My chair scraped against the marble floor, a harsh, final sound. "You're right, Dad," I said quietly. "I'll never sit at this table again." I walked out of the dining room, past the tree loaded with gifts I wouldn't open, and out the front door into the snow. I didn't take a coat. I didn't look back. That was the night I stopped trying to belong to them. That was the night I decided to belong to myself. 10 years is a long time. Long enough to bury a girl named Rosalind the victim, and build a woman named Rosalind the auditor. At 32, I wasn't just a survivor of that Christmas dinner. I was a forensic accountant who specialized in finding money people desperately wanted to hide. I tracked assets for federal indictments and dismantled fraud schemes for a living. I had learned that numbers don't lie, but people always do. My sanctuary was a glass and steel fortress perched on a ridge overlooking Lake Tahoe. It was designed to withstand 100-mile-per-hour winds and 6 feet of snow. It was isolated, expensive, and completely mine. Or at least, it was supposed to be. As my SUV crunched through the fresh powder of the driveway, my stomach tightened. The biometric security gate, which should have been sealed shut against the blizzard, was hanging open. The metal arm was bent at an unnatural angle, forced back by something heavy. Tire tracks led straight to my garage. I didn't call the police immediately. In my line of work, you assess the scene before you act. I parked, buttoned my coat against the biting wind, and walked to the front door. It was unlocked. The heat hit me first, blasting at maximum capacity. Then the smell, my expensive firewood burning in the hearth, and the distinct, oaky scent of the vintage Cabernet I had been saving for a promotion. I walked into the great room and stopped. They were everywhere. My mother was on the white boucle sofa, her feet up on the coffee table, flipping through a magazine. Michelle, now 29 and looking every bit the faded golden child, was pulling my cashmere throws out of a storage chest. And there, standing by the fireplace with a glass of my wine in his hand, was Daniel, my father. He looked older, his face lined with the kind of stress that comes from dodging creditors. But the arrogance was exactly the same. He didn't look like an intruder. He looked like a king who had finally claimed his castle. "Took you long enough," he said, taking a sip of the wine. "The drive up here is treacherous. You really should have the road paved better." I stood in the entryway, snow melting off my boots. I didn't say hello. I didn't ask how they found me. I just looked at the wine glass. "Get out," Michelle laughed, tossing a blanket onto the floor. "Don't be dramatic, Rosalind. We're family. We're not going anywhere," Daniel said, setting the glass down on the mantel without a coaster. He walked toward me, invading my personal space just like he used to, using his height to intimidate. "We sold the house in Portland. Market was bad. Debts were high. We needed a place to land." "And you thought you'd land here?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "In a house you don't own, uninvited, after 10 years of silence?" "Family takes care of family," he said, spreading his hands as if stating a universal law. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. Now it's your turn. The law calls it filial responsibility, but I call it basic decency. We're moving in." He gestured around the room, claiming the walls, the view, the warmth. "Besides, look at this place. It's too big for one person. You have 4 bedrooms. We'll take the master wing, you can take the guest room. It's only fair." I looked at my mother, who wouldn't meet my eyes, and Michelle, who was already claiming my space as her own. They didn't see a daughter or a sister. They saw a resource. They saw a warm host to attach themselves to now that their own resources had dried up. They thought I was still the girl who walked away crying. They had no idea they had just broken into the home of a woman who hunted predators for sport. I'm going to ask you one time, I said. Leave. Daniel stepped closer, his voice dropping to a growl. Or what? You'll call the cops on your elderly parents in a blizzard? You'll throw your sister out in the snow? You don't have the stomach for it. Now go put your bags away and make us something to eat. We're starving. He turned his back on me and walked toward the kitchen, confident in his control. He thought he had won. He thought the conversation was over. I looked at his back, then at the digital control panel on the wall near the entryway. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel sadness. I felt the cold, hard click of a trap snapping shut in my mind. You're right, I whispered to myself. I don't have the stomach for it. I have the technology. I didn't say another word to Daniel. I didn't scream at my mother or slap the blanket out of Michelle's hands. Arguments require energy, and I wasn't interested in wasting mine on people who couldn't hear me. Instead, I walked past them, my heels clicking on the polished concrete floor with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. I reached the smart home control panel, mounted discreetly by the hallway leading to the east wing. It was an iPad Pro flush against the wall, controlling everything from the humidity in the wine cellar to the perimeter cameras. Michelle called out from the living room, her voice mocking. Running away to your room? Go ahead. We'll be here when you're ready to apologize. I tapped the screen. The interface glowed blue. I didn't look back at them. I selected the menu for Zone A, main living and guest quarters. Then I pressed lockdown. The reaction was instant. Heavy steel security shutters descended over the floor-to-ceiling windows with a mechanical thrum-chunk sound that vibrated through the floorboards. The view of the swirling snow vanished, replaced by walls of industrial gray metal. The natural light was gone. What the hell? Daniel shouted. What is this? A prison? It's security, I whispered to myself. Then, I swiped to the Utilities tab. My finger hovered over the master relay for Zone A. In a house built for extreme climates, heating isn't a luxury. It's life support. And I held the plug. I tapped off. The hum of the forced air heating system died instantly. The recessed lighting overhead flickered once and went black. The music from the surround sound system cut out mid-note. The only light left in the great room came from the dying embers in the fireplace Daniel had stoked. I stepped through the heavy glass door that separated the main living area from my private office wing. As the magnetic lock engaged with a solid thud, I saw Daniel rushing toward me. He hammered his fist against the reinforced glass. Open this door, he roared, his face twisted in the firelight. Turn the lights back on. Are you crazy? I ignored him. I walked calmly into my office, a space heated by a separate generator, bathed in warm light. I sat at my desk, pulled the microphone of the internal intercom system toward me, and pressed the button. My voice boomed into the dark living room where they stood huddled together. The thermal rating of the glass in that room is excellent, I said, my voice crisp over the speakers. But without active heating, the internal temperature will match the external temperature in approximately 40 minutes. It is currently 5 degrees below zero outside. I watched on my monitor as Mom grabbed her coat, looking around frantically. Michelle was holding her phone up, trying to find a signal that the steel shutters had likely blocked. You have 10 minutes to vacate my property before the frostbite risk becomes significant, I continued. I suggest you start running. The gate is still open. You can't do this. Daniel screamed at the ceiling, spinning in circles. I'm your father. You can't freeze us out. I'm not freezing you out, Daniel, I replied, leaning back in my chair. I'm just declining to subsidize your warmth. Family takes care of family, right? Well, I'm taking care of myself. Tick-tock. I released the button. On the screen, I saw them panic. The arrogance was evaporating as quickly as the residual heat. Michelle was pulling on her boots. Mom was crying. But Daniel wasn't moving toward the door. He was looking at the fireplace. He picked up a heavy iron poker. He wasn't leaving. He was getting ready to dig in. I watched him swing the poker at the glass partition of my wine cellar. It didn't break, but the intent was clear. He wasn't scared. He was furious. And a furious narcissist doesn't retreat, he escalates. Okay, I said to the empty room. Let's see how cold you like it. I watched on the monitor as Daniel swung the iron poker. The sound of shattering glass was sharp enough to cut through the silence of the office. He hadn't broken a window. He'd smashed the temperature-controlled casing of my vintage wine collection. But he didn't reach for a bottle. He reached for the wooden racking itself, ripping the cedar shelves off the wall with a strength born of pure, entitled rage. Then he threw the wood into the fireplace. He's burning the furniture, I said, my voice flat. He's literally burning the house down to stay warm. I didn't hesitate. I dialed 911. I have intruders in my home, I told the dispatcher. They are destroying property and refusing to leave. I am in immediate danger. I thought this was the end of it. I thought the law was a binary system. Owner versus intruder, right versus wrong. I forgot that my father had spent 60 years learning how to live in the gray areas where predators thrive. The sheriff's deputies arrived 12 minutes later. I unlocked the main door and met them in the foyer. The heat was off, the air already biting, but the smell of smoke hung heavy. They broke in, I said, pointing to the living room. I want them removed. Now. The lead deputy, a man with tired eyes and snow on his shoulders, walked into the great room. Daniel didn't look like a maniac anymore. He was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, shivering theatrically. Mom was weeping softly. Michelle looked like a frightened child. Sir, the deputy said. This is your daughter's residence? It's our residence, Daniel said, his voice trembling just the right amount. We've been living here. We have nowhere else to go. And look. He gestured to the dark lights. She's trying to kill us. She cut the heat. It's a blizzard outside, officer. She's trying to freeze her own parents to death. That's a lie, I cut in. They broke in an hour ago. Daniel reached into his coat pocket. He didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a stack of envelopes. We've been receiving our mail here for 30 days, he said, handing the stack to the deputy. Bank statements. Social Security. Look at the dates. I stared at the envelopes. He had changed his address weeks ago. He had been planning this invasion while I was on a business trip. And, Daniel added, pulling out his phone, we have a lease. He showed the deputy a screenshot. It was a text message from me, sent 3 months ago when he'd asked if he could store some boxes in my garage. I had replied, Fine, Dad. Put whatever you want in the house for now. He had cropped the context. To a stranger, it looked like permission to occupy. The deputy looked at the mail. He looked at the text. Then he looked at me. The sympathy in his eyes vanished, replaced by the dull annoyance of a bureaucrat facing a paperwork nightmare. Ma'am, the deputy said. This isn't a break-in. It's a civil dispute. He doesn't live here, I argued, my nails digging into my palms. He's a squatter. He broke the gate. He has established residency, the deputy countered. In the state of Nevada, if someone has been receiving mail and has plausible permission to be on the premises, they are tenants. I can't evict them without a court order. He's burning my walls. Then sue him for damages. But you can't kick him out into a snowstorm. The deputy stepped closer, his voice dropping to a warning. And you cannot turn off the utilities. That is constructive eviction. It's illegal. If you don't turn the heat back on right now, I will have to arrest you for endangerment. I felt the blood drain from my face. The law, the very thing I used to hunt criminals, had just been weaponized against me. The filial piety laws, the tenant protections, the loopholes designed to protect the vulnerable were now shielding the monster. I looked at Daniel. He wasn't shivering anymore. He was smiling. A small, tight smirk that only I could see. Turn it on, Rosalind, he whispered. I walked to the panel. I typed in the code. The lights flickered back on. The heater hummed to life. The deputies left, advising us to work it out. As the door clicked shut, the lock engaging, I realized the terrifying truth. I wasn't just trapped in a house with my abusers. I was legally obligated to keep them warm. Daniel stood up, stretching his arms as the room warmed. He walked over to the wine rack, grabbed a bottle I hadn't opened, and popped the cork. See, he said, pouring a glass. I told you. I live here now. I retreated to the only place they couldn't touch, the West Wing office, secured by a biometric scanner that read the unique topography of my retina. The heavy steel bolts slid home with a reassuring thunk, sealing me off from the invasion, but I couldn't shut them out completely. My desk was a command center, a bank of high-definition monitors glowing with the feeds from every room in the house. I sat in the dark, bathed in the blue light of the screens, and watched my family make themselves at home. It was like watching a nature documentary about parasites finding a new host. On screen 2, Michelle was in the hallway, dragging her wet boots across the hardwood. She stopped at the coat closet, forcing the lock with a kitchen knife she'd found. I watched her pull out my favorite trench coat, a Burberry I had bought to celebrate my first federal conviction. She put it on, spinning in front of the mirror, then laughed and said something to my mother. The audio picked it up clearly. Fits me better anyway. She never had the shoulders for it. On screen 3, my mother was walking through the dining area, running a finger along the edge of a limited edition print. She grimaced, wiping her hand on her pants. Dusty, she muttered, and so cold. No warmth in this place. Just like her. And on screen 1, Daniel. He was sprawled on my Italian leather sofa, boots still on, kicking ash from the fireplace onto the rug. He looked comfortable. He looked entitled. He looked like a man who had never paid a consequence in his life. I closed my eyes, and for a second, I wasn't in a fortress in Tahoe. I was back in my studio apartment in Seattle. 7 years ago. I was sitting at a wobbly kitchen table, staring at a check for $2,000. It was the first of the anonymous donations. I had heard through a cousin that my parents were losing their home, that Daniel's gambling debts were catching up. I didn't want to talk to them. I didn't want to see them. But I couldn't let them be homeless. I signed the check. A friend. I ate instant noodles for 3 weeks to cover that amount. I convinced myself it was noble. I convinced myself I was the bigger person. I opened my eyes. On the screen, Daniel poured another glass of my wine, spilling a red stream down the front of the white sofa. He didn't even try to wipe it up. They called me selfish when I missed Thanksgiving that year. They told the extended family I was cold and ungrateful. And while they were badmouthing me, they were cashing my checks to pay for Michelle's modeling classes. I watched Michelle smear lipstick on my mirror. I watched my mother criticize the life I had built from the ashes of their neglect. I had spent a decade thinking I was their savior. I thought if I just gave enough, forgave enough, paid enough, the hole in their souls would fill up. But looking at the pixelated image of my father laughing at my expense, the truth finally hit me with the force of a physical blow. I hadn't been helping them. I had been subsidizing them. I had been the silent investor in their cruelty. I had kept them afloat so they could have the energy to hate me. They weren't here because they missed me. They were here because the anonymous money had stopped. And like locusts, who had stripped a field bare, they had come to consume the source. The sadness that had been sitting in my chest for 10 years evaporated. It didn't turn into anger. It turned into something much more useful. It turned into accounting. "You think this is a free ride," I whispered to the screens. "But you just walked into an audit." I turned away from the monitors and swiveled my chair toward my main computer. The daughter who wanted their love was gone. The forensic accountant was clocking in. I woke up the terminal and logged in. Cold light filled the room. Here. I was not the daughter begging for approval. I was the auditor, hunting answers. They came from my house. I went for their records. No hacking needed, just knowledge. I ran Daniel's social security through public filings. In seconds, I found it. The lost Portland home was never foreclosed. He sold it 6 months ago for $650,000. $500,000 gone. The joint account he forgot existed told the rest of the story: sports betting sites, casino withdrawals, luxury leases for Michelle. He hadn't fallen. He'd burned his way through the money and arrived on my doorstep for a refill. But that alone wasn't enough to get him out. I expanded the search to federal filings. That was where I found the weapon. A Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Filed 14 days earlier. In it, he swore under oath that he owned no property, no accounts, and was homeless. He couldn't tell the court he was destitute and tell police he lived in my house. One of those statements was a crime. I printed the document. I grabbed the page, stood up, and left my office. Daniel was waiting at the exit, iron poker in hand, manic from fear and cold. I told him the truth. He owned nothing, not the Portland house, not mine, not me. His panic erupted into strategy. He called 911 and theatrically claimed I was armed and dangerous. Police arrived in force. I complied. Wrists cuffed, watching him act like a terrified father. When the officer asked if he lived here, he loudly confirmed it for every camera in the room, believing he was sealing my fate. That was the moment I dropped the trap. I asked the officer to read the bankruptcy declaration in my pocket. Daniel claiming no residence, no assets, homeless status. Silence. Then confusion. Then realization. I calmly explained the crime. Bankruptcy fraud. 5 years federal. The mood shifted instantly. The cuffs came off me. They went onto him. Michelle screamed. Mom cried. Daniel tried to backpedal, but it was too late. I watched as the squad cars vanished into the storm. For the first time in my life, I let consequences land where they belonged. Back inside, I taped the broken window and poured a glass of the wine Daniel claimed as his. My phone buzzed with a jail call. I blocked it. Silence settled over the house, cold, clean, earned. Blood creates relatives. Truth reveals strangers. And sometimes, the only way to free yourself is to let someone else finally be held accountable.